So ever since I started with the first book in the Nevernight Chronicle, I've been excited to get to this review, but I think that this video is going to go a different way than I expected. I started reading the Nevernight Chronicle by Jay Kristoff a couple months ago. I finally finished up the last book, Darkdawn, this month, and I have some thoughts. What I'll probably do here is a bit of a spoiler-free section at the beginning, and then I will alert you guys to a spoiler talk at the end where I kind of give my spoilery thoughts, because there's definitely a lot here, especially in the last book, that I wanted to touch on. And yeah, so I'll give you a bit of a spoiler warning for that. So if you guys don't already know, the book follows a young female protagonist named Mia Corvera, and it takes place in an old school Venetian, Venice-inspired type world. Mia is what's called a Darkin, and she has the ability to manipulate shadows. And you find out very quickly when she's very, very young that she, like I said, she's protected by the shadows. She has this ability to manipulate them, and she uses them, and that becomes her power that is then developed through the whole series. The main premise behind the plot is some bad things happened to Mia and her family when she was very, very young. She gets basically orphaned, and she begins down this path to get revenge on who she thinks is behind this terrible thing that happened to her and her family. So there are 3 books, and if I can describe each book in a word or two, I would have to say book 1, Assassin School, book 2, Gladiators, book 3, Pirates, Revenge, Love. So for my spoiler-free discussion, what I'll start by saying is this was a really, really strong female protagonist. This was a very, very good character arc. We got to see Mia from childhood into kind of late teens, maybe early 20s is sort of what I gather. And her arc, her development is exceptional. There are some times when, Mia will make some choices that you don't agree with. There are some times where you're just like, you can see the mistakes that she's making, or maybe you would do something different. But everything feels earned with Mia. Everything feels like, you can understand all the decisions that she's making, even if you would maybe do something different. Overall, I think because you spend enough time with Mia, you end up rooting for her despite all of her flaws. And, the book is pretty, it tells you that Mia's not perfect right from the beginning. And you go through the whole thing with her, and because you know the backstory, you can empathize with her. Now, all the other characters are actually very, very well done. There's a couple main characters, and then there's a bit of a supporting cast, which is actually very strong. And the nice thing is, as the books progress, you get a little bit of a backstory. You really start to, in book 2, click with a bit of a found family group of people that surround Mia. And this is the first time, I think, in Mia's life where she really allows her walls to come down and allow people into her life, and starts to seek help, because she's one of the type of people that, she needs to do everything on her own. She doesn't want to leave a trail of bodies behind her, because she knows that that's kind of what's going to happen. But for other personal reasons too, she just doesn't allow people in. She has this wall. And in book 2, you start to see that come down a little bit. There's a bit of found family. And in book 2, you really get a sense of personal development and relationships starting to build. And that carries through into the 3rd book with, the wrap up and the climax and all that. In book 2, you get to know, and a little bit in book 3 as well, you get to know the backstory of some of these characters. And some of them are very, very compelling. I would say most of the characters are actually really well done. Everybody, for the most part, is fleshed out. And, you care about what happens to these. And there is a body count. Jay Kristoff does kill off a lot of characters. When it happens, it carries a lot of weight. And because you end up getting fairly attached to some of these people, I think that it's executed fairly well in that way. The pacing is actually quite good. It's definitely a page turner. It's action packed. I think, the first book really is a lot of buildup. It's the world. It's a little bit of the politics, some of the main characters and that sort of thing. And the first book follows Mia from a young girl. You find out what happens to her and her family in order to fuel this revenge that really consumes her for the next few years. And she ends up in this school for assassins, this red church it's called. And it was actually really fun to see Mia go through. It was almost like an assassin's Hogwarts, definitely not as expansive and sprawling. And it wasn't, you're not following Mia in her studies day in and day out where she's making friends and stuff. But it was a little bit like that. You do follow some of her lessons. She acquires new skills, as the story progresses, and every skill that she learns seems to be very important for what it is that she's going to end up having to do. So the first book was really, really good that way. I loved the setup. I think the first book is actually my favorite. The first book was a lot of setup, a lot of character development, background, and world building. And I really, really liked the world. It was very, very rich. I think Jay Kristoff said that he spent some time in Venice to absorb the architecture and the surroundings and the sounds and the smells, and really just in order to build this world, which, like I said, is very reminiscent of Venice, Italy. The second book really takes place in the context of kind of a gladiator training area and arena, and that whole vibe. It's really gladiator. That basically sums up the second book. For me, the second book I didn't like as much. I loved the character development, the building of relationships, the backstory of some of these people that you get introduced to. But for some reason, I just didn't click with how long we stayed in the gladiator context. And I'm not really sure why, because I'm Greek. I love ancient, Rome, history and that kind of stuff. I love the movie Gladiator. I thought it was amazing. So it's probably one of my favorite movies. So I'm not really sure why. I think we ended up staying there for quite some time, and I wanted to explore the world a little bit more. I really, really fell in love in the first book with the rest of the world that we didn't get to see a whole lot of in the second book. And I think that detracted a little bit from my overall enjoyment of the second book. The pacing all throughout from the first and second book were actually very good. Even the pacing in the second book, even though we spent some time in an environment that I kind of got tired of, the pacing was pretty well done. The third book was, the last third of the last book was just a whirlwind. A lot of things happen. There's a really, really good climax, but there's a lot of stuff that I didn't like, unfortunately. And I thought that this was going to be a slam dunk. I thought after the first book, this was going to be one of my top favorite series. And to be honest with you, because of the uniqueness, because of the characters, because of the world, it actually ranks pretty high for me. I don't know exactly where I'd put it right now, but it actually is quite high. But again, there were a couple things that I couldn't quite get past. And for that reason, I ended up not loving the series as a whole as much as I thought I would. I think I gave each one about 4 stars. The last book, when I was about halfway through, I was going to give probably closer to 3.5 stars, maybe even 3. But the climax was very well done, and there were a few emotional moments that really landed for me, and some revelations and stuff in the second to third book that I thought, I actually thought that it was pretty well done overall. And the last third of the last book, maybe the last quarter, really saved the last book for me, and I ended up enjoying the whole thing quite well. But again, I do have some issues. A lot of people seem to have problems with the smut and kind of the, the sex and stuff in this book. It's definitely not a young adult book. It is very explicit. There's a lot of sex. There's a lot of gore and violence and stuff in the book. And I tend to agree with those that criticize the amount of sex in the book. It's not that it's not well done. I think Jay Kristoff actually writes a pretty good sex scene. And like I've said before, there's a place for romance in any book, as long as it's well written. I don't necessarily need the author to fade to black all the time. We can have a scene that's described and played out, and I think that that's fine. But a few of the scenes went on a little longer than I needed them to. For me, they interrupted the story a little bit. They're important to the story, but I didn't really care as much. I don't think that they were bad. I don't even think that they were out of place. I just, it took me out of the story a little bit. I just wanted to get back to Mia's jam and figure out, what she's going to do and how she's going to do it and who else is going to die, that sort of thing. And when we get bogged down in some of these sex scenes that unfortunately happen with characters that I didn't really care about, I think that's what pulled me out of it. There is a relationship in this. There's a romance in this. I touched on it in my unpopular opinions tag video. This relationship I just didn't really vibe with. This relationship I just didn't buy. It's a personality thing for me. I don't think it's a spoiler if I say that it's a same-sex relationship. And I just didn't really care for it, to be honest with you. It was one where some things happen in the first book, I believe in the first book, and you just can't get past what this person has done. And you're sort of almost expected to just kind of get over it and allow this relationship to sort of happen. Not only that, but in the third book, we really lean into what I now understand to be one of my least favorite tropes, and that is a love triangle. We really, really lean into this love triangle in the third book. I really just could not give a shit. Like I just, one of the characters I actually liked a lot more. The character that is around for more of the book, and the character that, ends up being kind of the one that's chosen, I really just didn't care for that one. So the love triangle was actually really hard for me to bear, and it comes up again and again. And it was one of those times where I was just like, you know what? Like, I don't care anymore. Like, I don't care. First of all, I don't care which one this person chooses. Second of all, I'd kind of prefer neither of you. Like, it wasn't to my taste, unfortunately. So because it played such a heavy role in the third book, that also was one of the things that pulled me out of the story a little bit. I don't necessarily think that it was written in a way that wasn't good. I just didn't really care. And with this particular love triangle, and even just in the relationships, there were a few eye-rolling moments, that I just kind of couldn't really care about. And to go back to the sex, even if the writing was fairly okay, and again, the way that this was told was actually pretty okay. But at times the vibe that I got was just like horny teenager vibes. And, a lot is happening in the world, but all they want to do is just, take each other's clothes off. So that was one where I guess it sort of depends on your taste. Some people are going to enjoy that. Some people aren't. Some people are going to, be here for that stuff. For me, I was here for the rest of the story, and I couldn't really be bothered for all the sex. A little bit of it was great. And a couple points I was like, oh, wow, like, damn, like there's some stuff happening. But it just went on a little bit too long, and the vibes and the relationships I just didn't care about. So that was kind of a bummer for me. Another criticism people tend to have is the footnotes. I actually found the footnotes. So I have to say that I read this I did a little bit on audio, and I did a little bit on ebook. And I found that the footnotes were actually easy enough to read on the ebook. You would just see an asterisk or whatever, or a star, and you would click on it and it would pop up a footnote, and then you would exit back out of it. It was fine. I've heard complaints that on the ebook, it's a little bit difficult to work with the footnotes. I found the footnotes to be quite clever. I found them to be quite funny. The author breaks the fourth wall and kind of gives you a bit more background, a bit more, elaborates on some stuff, pokes fun at itself a little bit in the latter part of the book or in the latter part of the series. And honestly, I didn't mind it. I thought it was pretty funny, but there were a couple points where I thought maybe there were too many. And I would have to say that I don't believe you need to read all these footnotes to enjoy the book. In fact, I can say with confidence that if you didn't read any of the footnotes, you would get quite a lot out of the story itself. You really don't need them. I think it just adds a little bit more. And if you read the first few and if you enjoy it, I think you'll enjoy most of them. I would say not all, but a lot of the world building actually happens in the footnotes. So that's something that maybe, while you don't need to have the footnotes to enjoy the story, if you value world building and you love kind of knowing the history, the lore, the politics, the government, all that stuff, then you will like the footnotes. So I would urge you to try them. If you can't stand them, as some people can't, then it's fine. You can just skip them. But if you like them, there's enough of them to keep you happy. In fact, I would argue that there are probably too many. The dialogue is actually some of the best I've read. It's actually very, very good. It's believable. It's realistic. It's very clever, very witty. There's a lot of swearing. Jay Kristoff is very creative when it comes to swear words and things like that. So there's excellent dialogue. It's very funny. All of the characters have unique voices. You kind of know who's talking depending on what's being said, which is great. And I think that's actually very hard to do. So the dialogue is excellent in my opinion. So overall, I really enjoyed the story itself. I loved the characters. I had a really good time. The second book, we spent a little bit too long, like I said, in a particular context that I kind of just wanted to move past. And in the third book, there were a few choices that were made that I just couldn't quite get behind. So like I said, it took away my enjoyment a little bit of the third book. But because I enjoyed the first so much, and all the character building and relationships and stuff that began to form in the second, and with Mia really developing her arsenal, her powers and stuff that become pretty impressive. It wrapped things up pretty nicely in the third book. And, as much as it could have been a little bit better for me, I did have a great time with it. I think if you like, revenge stories, I think if you like strong female leads, relationship building and unique worlds, unique magic systems, if you like the, magic school type of element, if you like assassin stories, if you like revenge stories, if you like found family themes in your books. I think if you like any of those things, you're probably going to like this. If you like clever dialogue, snappy dialogue, if you like just a unique fantasy experience, I would urge you just to pick up Nevernight because I think you'd be pleasantly surprised. Now, I think we're going to hop into a bit of a spoiler discussion, at least some spoiler territory here. So I'm going to put something up on the screen so you guys are aware that this is a spoiler section, because there's a couple things I just wanted to touch on. If you're still here and you've either read it or you haven't read it and want to hear my spoiler thoughts, here we go. The love triangle that I was talking about earlier between Mia, Ashlyn, and Trick was excruciatingly just annoying for me. I don't exactly know why. I think this is just a thing where I'm a 35-year-old male reading a fantasy book where there's a young female protagonist, and all of that stuff is totally cool. I love it. But the love triangle kind of trope, I realize, is not my thing. I'm not the target demographic for that. And to be quite frank with you, there are a lot of YA sort of things and elements in these books, which make me kind of understand the argument that this was, YA, or at least understand the confusion or whatever, because a lot of people think that this is a YA series, but it's not. Anyway, the love triangle just didn't work for me. The fact that, Ashlyn as a character, the fact that she kills Trick and then Trick, has to climb his way back through death to profess his love to Mia, and she ends up basically hooking up with Ashlyn. The fact that the two of them got together was okay. In that moment, like in book 2, there's a moment of vulnerability and weakness on the part of Mia, but also Ashlyn. They end up together. I think it was more a moment of lust and a moment of just kind of giving in. In fact, that's how it's described, is Mia says, she's just kind of not thinking, letting herself, choose what she wants to do, not really worrying about the consequences, just kind of opening up a little bit. And so she ends up getting together with Ashlyn. And then this becomes, a relationship that's really leaned into. And at some point, we're convinced that Mia is okay with the fact that Ashlyn killed Trick. And while I don't necessarily think that would happen and that Mia, it's in Mia's character's nature to just kind of be okay with that, the only thing that makes it kind of believable is the fact that, Ashlyn's motivation for killing Trick was all about family, all about kind of revenge for her own family. And so there's this parallel between Mia and Ashlyn. I mean, they're really very much almost the same character. I mean, it's the same kind of arc, the same kind of story. They both have these strengths that play off of each other. And while I can understand, reading it, kind of the reasons behind it, I just don't think that Mia and Ashlyn made sense together. For one reason or another, I just couldn't feel it. When Trick comes back, that was kind of a really cool moment. A lot of people kind of freaked out at that moment. I sort of saw it coming. There's this, shadowy apparition type figure that bails Mia out of a couple jams along the way. And I thought, oh shit, like maybe that's Trick. But so when that happened, I wasn't entirely surprised. But then the love triangle starts to happen and I just couldn't do it. And like I said, we lean into it so heavily. It goes back and forth and back and forth. And, at the end of the day, to be honest with you, I just didn't really like the fact that she ended up with Ashlyn. It just didn't really make sense to me. I just didn't really like Ashlyn as a character, unfortunately. And when it comes to, this guy that Mia's been chasing for her whole life, the person that's been responsible for her family's death and everything that's happened to her, Julius Scava, she finds out that he's her father. It was very much a Darth Vader, I'm your father kind of moment. And I thought that was pretty cool. And the fact that Julius's son, was it Lucius, I think it's in the book, is actually Jonan, her younger brother, who didn't die and who actually survived. She thought he was dead. That was really cool too. So now there's this battle between her and her dad, who's Julius Scava, this guy that she's been trying to kill forever, for the last 8 years, whatever it is. Her and her father are sort of fighting over her brother now. Her dad wants the brother back, and Mia's trying to win Jonan back as her brother, trying to alert him to the fact that their dad is this evil, evil guy. You end up finding out that Julius Sceva is darkened as well, which makes sense. And so is Jonan. So the three of them are darkened. They have the ability to manipulate shadow and that sort of thing. And so that was actually really cool. I thought there were a couple really emotional moments that landed. There were a couple deaths that really hit home, because you end up caring about these people, like the gladiator people that Mia becomes really good friends with. A lot of them get massacred. And, you feel really bad for not only Mia, but for all of them, because they were all so close. They became family. And at the end, when I forget the name, but it was like the moon god that is part of Mia and all these darken, when he kind of fell to earth, I think he ends up kind of granting Mia the ability to, to come back, because he sort of owed her for bringing all these shadows back together and reestablishing this god in the universe. So he kind of grants her the ability to come back. Ashlyn was shown the way back by Trick, I believe. I could be wrong on this one, but that's how I read it. She was shown her way back by Trick, ends up being kind of resurrected into this, not really alive, but not really dead, kind of a shadow existence. And so Mia and Ashlyn get to live out their lives in this house by the lake. And I just, the fact that Trick kind of climbs his way back, and then Ashlyn gets shown her way back by Trick, and then Mia is granted this opportunity to also not quite be dead, but kind of, be resurrected into this kind of like weird in-between existence. I felt that it kind of cheapened that a little bit. The fact that Ashlyn and Mia can kind of live out their lives together was okay. It just felt a little bit silly to me at the end. But overall, it was actually a really, it was a good experience. I'm glad I read them. I don't know if I would ever like reread these. I think, I got enough out of it this one time. Jay Kristoff, I do enjoy his writing. I have no doubt that I'm going to enjoy The Empire of the Vampire when I pick that up eventually. He's still an auto-buy author for me. I'm very curious what he puts out next. This one was my entry into his writing. I thought it was very well done. A couple things missed for me, but overall I had a good time. I'm curious if you guys have read it. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments. I'm always curious as to what other people's opinions are. If you guys have read all of the books or even just the first one, let me know what you guys think. This is a bit of a rambly review, but I just wanted to get my thoughts out there and let you guys know what I thought. And that's it for me. I will have more reviews coming soon enough, but otherwise, thanks for sticking around. Thanks for subscribing if you have, and I will catch you on the next one.